In the last video, I discussed how to set up click events in React. In this video, I'm going to talk about forms, or more specifically, I'm going to talk about controlled components. And I'm going to focus on inputs and text areas this time. If you want more information on forms, you can look right here on the Facebook GitHub IO site for React, and you can see how you can use selects and other things in here. But I'm going to focus on inputs and text areas right now. So we have a new app. So once again, something completely new. This one will take a little bit more time than the last time because we're going to actually build 3 different things in this video to talk about how to use controlled components or use inputs and text areas. So let's start by creating some components. I'm going to create a new component called input example. And I'm going to import React and create my component. Okay, here we go. I have created a component. I am going to switch this to JSX coloring. There we go. So I've created this component. I should be able to use this in app.js. And so let's get rid of this stuff here. Alright, so here it is. Notice how there's no input in it. What I'm doing here is I am defining a component and just getting it hooked up and not worrying at this point about the functionality. Now that I have this component integrated into the app.js component, now I'm actually going to start focusing on making this do what I want it to do. So let's do this. I want to control or have some state here. What I'm going to build is something that where you have a text box, you have an input, and you hit some keys, you fill in information, you hit a button, and then it displays that word on the page. That's where I'm going with this. Setting up our default state. Right now I'm going to start with a blank value. And I'm also going to hold 2 keys, though, you know what, I'm going to work my way there and explain why that's actually useful. So let's start with just this. So with a controlled component, or the, I guess, normal way of doing inputs, it's going to look like this. You're going to have an input. You're going to set the value of the input to the state. And so with it just like this, we can go here, we can go to the form and we can type. Here I am, I'm actually typing things, and I'm not seeing anything. And the reason why is I have bound the value of this input to what is in state. The state right now always has a blank string. If I change it to something else, it's going to be stuck at that. It won't change. So this is a bound component. I'm binding the value to state. So for me to change the value, then I must change the state. So let's do that. In the last video, we talked about onClick. Here's another one, onChange. And this one is useful for inputs. And so what I want to happen is whenever this value changes, I'm going to change the state. So I need a function. this handle is a pretty common way of naming things. So handle input change. So on change and then handle input change. Let's do this with an arrow function, like so. And I will say this dot set state. I'm going to set the value to something. What am I going to set it to? Well, let's see. I'm going to handle input change here. And so how am I going to get the value? How does this work? Well, here's the fun thing. So whenever you're in regular JavaScript programming and handling DOM events, if you set an add event listener for a button or an input, like for key up or whatnot, anytime that event listener fires, it's going to pass an event object. And that event object has very useful information. Let's go console log it. Div cannot present a paragraph. All right, well, let me just deal with that warning. So I put a div, which is what comes out of here, inside this paragraph. So, well, you know what? It's no longer a paragraph. Problem solved. Okay, and so I hit a key. Now it says something because in this function here I set it, nope, not that, here. In this function I set it to something. Ignore that for the moment. What is interesting is that it sent this event object. This will have some interesting things, and the most important thing is this bit right here. I can get the value of the text box by doing this. evt.target.value. And so now every time I change this input, it's going to fire this function and pass this event object. This event object will have a reference to the target element, which is this input, and I can get the value out and set the value in state. When I set the value in state, it will obviously change it and then cause a re-render, which will then update the value in the component. And so I will get B, C, D, E, F, G. All right, I will actually get my component updating at that point. And just to show you, let's put a console log right there. So whenever this input changes, it's going to render. So here we go. In the initial render, it had a blank value. And so every time I type a key, it causes the state to change, which causes a re-render, which causes the input to be updated with the value I typed. And so that's the basic idea right there. So now what I want to do is I want to create a button. And whenever I display this, hit this button, I want to display the value. So let's put an H2, something big. And so if I want to set the value here in the H2 only when I hit the button, then I actually need two values in state. Well, why? Well, let's try to avoid doing that. Let's say this.state.value. So if we do this and we start typing, it actually updates even when we don't hit display. And the reason why is because every time we change it, every time we change the input, it runs this handle input change, which updates the value, and this is using value. Okay, well that doesn't work. Well, what can we do about that? Well, the easiest way to do this would be to actually have two values. And we will use display value here in the H2. And I'm going to set that only when we click on the button. So now going back to here, there we go. State is being updated with value, but display value remains blank. So now I'm going to handle the click. So handle click. In this case, I don't need the event object, so I can do without. I'm going to set state, and I'm going to put in the display value, that was my key, I'm going to put in there this .state.value. And let's see how well this works. I expect it to work swimmingly. Hello. And as you can see, I'm wrong. I must have done something terrible, like forgetting to actually hook up the button. Let's try this again. This time it will work great. Hey, look at that. It worked great. You know, what I would like to do is blank out this at the end. How hard is that? It's actually really easy. I'll get the value out of state and then blank it out right there. And so now I can type in and hit display, and there we go. I blanked out the value and I'm showing it there. I can put something else and that'll replace it. All right, that's one component. So this is a controlled component. Its value is controlled by React, which means if we want the value to change, we will actually have to change the state. That's the idea behind a controlled component. Now I want to create another one of these. And so this time we're going to use a single input again, except this time we're going to build a list. Instead of taking the value in the input and put it on the page for display, I'm going to save an array of values and build a list. So let's do it. List builder. Import React, and you will see lots of examples where people do this. I don't remember if I've discussed this. This is just an alternative way of doing this. This bit right here. So in this example, I did react.component, and here I used decomposition to pull out that as a separate variable and used it. Do whatever. I usually just go ahead and do this one. I think it's actually a little less typing, so I go with that. So let's see, list builder. Let's go ahead and start with our render function, and let's get this on the page before we do anything else. Now I'll import list builder. And let's see, do we see it on the page? We do. Now I almost made a spelling error. I'm going to go back and redo that spelling error. Let's see what kind of error we get. Line 19, list builder is not defined. Okay, so that's handy. So line 19, list builder is not defined. If we go to line 19, list builder is not defined. That's why. It's because we misspelled that. Okay, so I have my list builder. But it doesn't do anything. So let's go ahead, since this is going to be a component with state, let's go ahead and set that up. In this case, we're going to have an input and an array of words. Or array of items. It can be a single word, it can be a sentence, whatever. So I'm going to create an array like so. And this is going to be for the input value. So let's do this. And this time I'm actually going to create this using a form. It's not necessary to use forms, but you can. So I'm going to show you an example of actually how to use one here. So input value equals this.state.value, and on change, I want to change the value. So handle input change is a perfectly reasonable function name. So we will need the event object because just like in the last component, we need to get the value out of the input and then change the state. So here we go. I'm done that. I need to this.setState, change the value like so. I think that'll work. Yes, okay. So we have our input. You know what, let's just create this like so. And so when someone hits this add button, I'm going to submit the form. So this type submit. If we're using a form, we can actually use this on submit right here. And so let's go here and say handle submit. Well, first thing I want to do is I want to prevent default. And the reason why I want to prevent default is because I don't want the form to actually do any sort of page posting or anything like that. I want to just handle all of this myself. And so once I see that a submit has happened, I want to take the value out of state and change the array. So I named the items like so. I am going to add something to this array. I'm actually going to slice this array to make a copy of the original array. I actually don't need to do that at this point, but this is actually to get you used to what you're going to do perhaps whenever we get to Redux, where in Redux we don't want to change existing objects, we want to create new copies of them. So this is just to get you ready for that. At this point it's not quite necessary, but yeah, it's fine. So I'm going to push onto here what is in this.state.value, and then what I'm going to do is I need to set state on this, and I'm going to replace the original array, which was at items, with this new one. I don't have any visual for that, so let's console log our state. Okay, well, I've done something stupid, probably because I created my function and didn't actually put it there. All right, put things in, hit add. Let's clear this. I should have had this up in the first place. All right, so I hit enter in that input. Also, if I hit click, both of them will submit this. And notice that my array seems to keep growing. That's pretty cool. And so what are my items? Well, it's that same text over and over again. So this is actually adding things to the list. Let's make this a little bit better in that whenever I put the item in, I will blank out the current value. There we go. So if I'm making my shopping list, steak. So now there is steak in there and Dr. Pepper. Now let's see, Dr. Pepper should be in the array and so on. Hey, we're doing it. It's working. We're living the dream. Okay, now that I have values being added to the array, let's render them. And this is a good review for whenever we were mapping all the things a few videos ago. And so what I need here is I need a list of some sort. What I want to do is I want to say this .state.items.map. And so this will basically iterate over the items for us, and whatever we return from the map function will be the transformed version of each item in the list. And so I create a function like so. I'm going to create a single line arrow function because I can do that in this case and say li and then say item. Now to remind ourselves of a warning, I'm going to get a warning with this. So let me open up this here and add apple. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. And so this gets back to having a key for each item when we map. And I will just use the index. And so that should solve that problem. Hey, look, this isn't what I wanted at all. It just says item. Probably because I just put item in there when I should have surrounded that with curly brackets. And now it'll work. Excellent. Cool. There we go. All sorts of items. So, what did we do in this example? Well, we created a component that keeps track of everything that's been input and submitted through that input, and it keeps track of it in an array, like so. All right, that's our second component to show you how to use these controlled components. Let's do it one more time, except this time add a text box into, a text area into the example. So I need another file, and what I'm going to build is a live preview widget. And so we're going to be able to input information into the input and into the text area, and it's going to show a live view of what that would look like styled, which means I'll need to do a little bit of styling. So I'm going to call this live preview.js. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to add this to the other component. Notice how I've forgotten to export this component. Let's see what kind of error we get here. I'm going to put it at the top so we don't have to scroll down as much. Okay, export default imported as live preview was not found. Was not found. Well, now it was found. And so that's the error you're going to get if you forget to export a component when you're creating it. I do it all the time. Totally forget to do that. So anyway, now we've got the live preview component. This thing right here is from the first component we did. Let's add some styling. I want to make that obvious. Alright, let's put a class on this to remind you. You can't use the class keyword here. You use class name, and React will turn that into the class attribute in the normal HTML, so it's actually going to work like normal stuff. So class name, live preview. And here, for live preview, we give everything a background color of a very light gray, and I'm going to add a border bottom so we see that here. Hey, look, now it's a little bit more obviously different from that. Now let's change that from border bottom and add some padding. Excellent. Okay, live preview. And so what I want to do is I want to put my input controls on the left-hand side of the screen, and I want to put the live preview on the right-hand side of the screen. And so let's do that. And so what I want to do is I'm going to use Flexbox for this. And so I'm going to wrap, let's see, I'm going to do this. I'm going to wrap everything in a div. The reason why I'm going to wrap everything in a div here, and then here, let's put this in a form, shall we? Is because this will allow me to set this div as the flex, the display flex parent, and then I can set these as the children and style these the way I want to style them. So there's the form that's on the left, and a div class name equals preview. And I'm going to put this as an H3, and I will put the input value here, and I will put the text area as a paragraph. Okay. See how this looks? Well, it looks horrible, but it's okay. Here's the text input, here's the text area, input value, text area. Okay, let's start putting this together. Close that sidebar to give us a little more room. Let's go ahead and set up our state. At the very least, I know I'm going to need a state for the input value and over here. Since this is going to be a live preview, I'm actually always going to keep the input in sync with this and the text area in sync with this, and so I will only need one value per. And so I'm going to call that input header, because logically that's what I'm doing here. It's going to be this H3. And what's going to be in the text area is going to be main text. So let's see, value equals this dot state dot header. Let's do this. Header goes here. Main text goes here. All right, and then set the value of the text area to this dot state dot main text. I think that's what I just called that. And then here, let's see if it shows these default state values. Header goes here, main text goes here. So all I have to do is change that. But before I do that, I'm going to do just a little bit of styling. So preview area is what holds both of those values, and so I'm going to say live preview, preview area, you're going to be display flex. Now the next bit is going to be the form and the preview. So let's see, I'm going to say in live preview the form, and actually live preview the preview. I'm going to set them both to a width of 50%. Aha, so now I have my inputs and text areas over here on the left and my header over here, because by default when you put two elements in Flexbox, it's going to set them up side by side like so, which is awesome because this is normally what I want to do. And so now I want to put this text area below the input. This is easy. If I want to target that input, if I just say display block, that's going to push that text area down, but it doesn't push it to the left, which is a little strange. And so it's time to do some sleuthing. I'm honestly a little bit surprised about that. You know, I wonder if that is centered because of the previous text align centering that was going on here. So let's try this. Nope. Oh, well, let's see. You know, I'm not entirely sure. I'm just going to go with this for right now. And maybe later at the end of this video, I'll feel like dealing with it. So we have an input and we have a text area. We have a header and we have our main text. Let's go update this stuff in code. So if we go to live preview, what I need to do is on change for both the input and the text area, I need to change what's in state. So on change this dot handle input change. Or better, I don't like that, handle header change, because that is a bit more semantic. So here we go. Let's see. Header change. I want to this dot set state. I need the value out of here. So EBT. See, header will now come from EBT.target.value. See if that works. And the answer is no. It's probably because I changed it in one place but not the other. There we go. So that's pretty cool. Live updating. Now let's do the text area. Same basic idea. On change okay, let's try it. Header, man buys too much Dr. Pepper. Purchase spree causes DP shortage in the DFW area. Panic ensues. Mayor calls for emergency funds. That makes sense to me, because that could totally happen. Okay. So we have a text area, which is stubbornly still there in the middle, and I'm just going to choose not to worry about it right now. Here's an input, and every time we change the input, it changes the value in state, which changes this. Every time I change the text area, it changes the value in state, so it changes this, and they're always in sync. Or if I want to do the same thing in code and look at it that way, I have an input whenever someone says, okay, starts typing in this input, this function fires, which is this. And the input is the target here, so I can say ebt.target a value to get the value out of that. And I can set that as the header value right there. And when that happens, state is updated. And so therefore, the component re-renders. And when it re-renders, it updates both the header value and the value down there in the H3. And the same goes for the text area. It's the same basic idea. Okay, those are controlled components. And with these, you basically have the value of the component controlled by the state. There are other options. If you look at the React documentation, I already mentioned this. There's other examples of forms. Also of interest should be here at the bottom, I believe is a link to Uncontrolled Components. And so these are going to be useful when you don't want to give React complete control, or by default it can't do what you want. A really good example of this would be if you wanted to do Canvas. If you want to do Canvas just by using plain old React, it's not going to get much for you. There's a separate React project for doing Canvas in React. I've never actually used it, so I cannot comment on it. But that would be a good case where you would perhaps use an uncontrolled component. Feel free to jump into that documentation. Maybe we will deal with this in a future video, maybe not. All right, so that's our application for the day, or at least for this video. If you have any requests or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments.